can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. And thanks, Jeremy. We're going to dig into this topic. Jeremy mentioned the automation buzzword. So let me share my screen with you all, and we'll get started. So a little bit background on me. I'm not as hands-on as Jeremy. We'll get into the product. We'll actually do a little bit of demo walkthrough, but mostly I'll talk about kind of the direction and focus of the Cortex team. So my background, software engineer by trade, computer science engineering, did probably almost as much time doing software engineering and architecture as I've done on the product management side and now recently the marketing side, creating vulnerabilities most likely rather than closing them. So in fact, one of the first products I worked on was a JNDI implementation. So with the Java concerns over the last year, I wonder if my initial code was impacted. I bet it was. So anyway, recently moved over to the marketing side. We're going to talk about why AI and automation are critical for the SOC of the future. We'll talk a little bit about Palo's SOC, and then what the Cortex team, the product team, has been working on most recently. If you haven't been introduced to XIM, we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll take a look at it and have a good conversation. So feel free to ask questions, and we will get started. All right, first and foremost, I'm just going to throw this up for a second, folks, in case folks aren't familiar with the entire stack. So Cortex is represented in green. That's what we're going to talk about here. Obviously, three key pillars of security that I would point out for users that you probably know about. Our network security focuses on our NGFW and SASE and our hybrid workforce and dealing with all of that. The cloud security component, Prisma Cloud, is all about the cloud native application protection platform and making sure that everything you're doing with cloud security is addressed. This is more about addressing DevSecOps and posture and security management in the cloud. We also provide cloud security in the Cortex stack, but it's more focused on not so much how do we shift left and reduce risk of applications we're developing in the cloud, but how do we make sure that the SOC has visibility to what's happening in the cloud, and no matter how that application or workload got there, is it being used appropriately, or is there some concern around the use of that content? So endpoint security, it says on the right, but I would say much more than that. Cortex is a lot more than that. We're going to talk about it. I'd say endpoint is the cornerstone of what we talk about as extended detection and response, and then there's a lot more around that as well. Cortex you'll also see in green up across the top because, as we'll talk about in this discussion, it's also where content flows from all of the different solutions, whether they be our network security stack, cloud security, endpoint, and third-party solutions as well, to make sure that the SOC has visibility across their entire business. All of that is founded on our Unit 42, the red or amber on the bottom here, Threat Intelligence and Incident Response Team, which I would say is much more than that. This is our research team. Unit 42 is the feet on the street. These are the guys that respond to incidents that our customers are facing. They provide proactive cybersecurity services in the form of planning, purple teaming. They provide IR retainers for IR or any cybersecurity needs you may have. But they also house the majority of our threat researchers that are constantly studying adversarial tactics and techniques and really driving the rules that help us with all of these products in terms of prevention and detection. So Unit 42, they're also the experts on the Cortex products, and they provide IR and MDR services leveraging that stack. If I were to try to characterize what Cortex is all about, I use this slide a lot because I think it's funny and it's good. It's a lot like a Scooby-Doo episode, right? If you look at any post-breach forensics investigation, they almost always work, and they could take hundreds of hours to thousands of hours in response to an incident, but 99.9+% of the time, the team is able to reconstruct the attack and understand what the adversary did, how they did it, what they were after, and what the impact was. And it's not because they're working with the adversary to understand that. They don't ask them to replay the attack, obviously, because nobody's going to do that. How are they doing that? Well, it's because the data that's necessary to understand what an adversary did does exist. But too often, we're not putting that data to work before a breach occurs. And that's the whole purpose and goal of the Cortex team, is to leverage data and telemetry to understand what's happening before a business is impacted. So that's kind of our mantra. That's what Cortex is all about. And when we engage in these IR and guest investigations, whether it's us or whether it's Mandiant, Verizon, doesn't matter who it is, when we talk to customers about this, the reason this isn't happening today is because the telemetry that's needed exists, but it exists in a lot of different places. And we think that what actually makes it to the SOC, to the security analyst often, is a snippet of that. It's a small viewpoint from lots of different angles. They're getting a human readable alert or multiple alerts from a single campaign, attack campaign, from the lots of different tools that they've put in place to address the latest security concerns. That might be an NTA tool, something for EDR, another solution for IAM, another solution for cloud detection and response. And maybe all of that comes together in the SIM, but really the SIM, it wasn't designed to handle the scale of data that businesses are addressing today and actually coalesce all this data into something meaningful that helps them understand what's going on. And so when we talk to security teams, they're struggling, right? They're struggling with alert overload. They're struggling with understanding what is a real investigation and how to respond to it. And when we talk to our own SOC, this is an old slide. I'm going to talk about Legacy SOC here and to talk about where our SOC has been focused. And this is Palo Alto when I'm talking about these slides. This is actually coming from our SOC tour, which I will show you, but this is how our SOC has viewed the world for the last few years and where we've transitioned to. But the enemies of the modern SOC or the legacy SOC are too many alerts, low fidelity alerts coming in from lots of different solutions. Those alerts require time-consuming investigation. And frankly, it's a lot of repetitive and manual tasks, which is why we're looking to automation and to machine help in a lot of this, because humans just frankly aren't designed to enjoy that type of work. It's stressful in that they're constantly, getting a high number of alerts and needing to parse through that in a thorough way. But frankly, the majority of those in many organizations end up resulting in a false positive. So that causes potential for analysts to skip steps and maybe miss something important. Important threats are often missed in the details of those repetitive alerts that folks are looking at. And the majority of SOC time has been spent over the years on just responding to alerts and this process of continually firefighting. And so it's required large SOC teams to address that. And given the type of work that the teams have faced, it's been pretty well known in the industry that there's a lot of turnover in the analyst community. So how do we combat that? What have we done? If you're interested in understanding more about what Palo's done and how we use our stack, there's a wonderful SOC tour done by Devin Johnstone, which you can find if you just Google the virtual. I think you'll get these slides as well. There's a link here that you can follow. But this will actually take you through our SOC. And it's funny because you're looking at the physical SOC that is in our executive briefing center. If you've had the opportunity to come and visit us there, I'm often there. It doesn't quite look like this anymore, right? I would say this is more our virtual SOC now than it is our physical SOC. And the physical SOC seems to now be Cortex. That's where ever since the pandemic, our security team lives together on a platform that is the security operating center for the SOC, which is actually our software. And so it's interesting to look at this tour and see how things were. And you'll see the essentially the NOC, the dashboards up there across the top. Mostly those are dark now. They're black and they live within the web pages or the portals, the screens of our security analysts on their home computers or wherever they may be. We do get analysts that still work in the SOC, but collaboration has been facilitated through XOR, through the Cortex stack. And largely that is where all of that happens today. But that said, I'm going to take us through a little bit more here about our SOC before we talk about specifically about automation and the evolution of automation within Palo Alto Networks. So our SOC is composed of about 22, I think it's actually maybe 24-ish personnel now. And the majority of those, we only have about 10 to 12, I think it's 12 now, security analysts, plus managers, maybe 14 that are spread out across the US and EMEA, which for the massive amount of footprint that we address is pretty streamlined, actually. So why is that? We have really a SOC solution that is doing a lot of the tier 1 analysis for us. And so the SOC analysts that we do have, the 10 to 12 analysts that we do have are more tier 2. And the platform itself is doing a lot of the work for automation of investigation for us. And so we also have folks that focus on automation. We have 4 automation engineers and then an engineer and manager that are focused on making sure that log management and data is flowing. And that's something we're looking to provide more automation around as we talk about the XIM platform as well. We do have an offensive security engineer, or now I think a couple, and another one focused on DLP. So really the goal for us is how do we optimize the usage of the time around our analysts to provide them with more opportunity to do less monotonous work and to get more engaged on more forward-thinking work. So when we look at how that plays out in our SOC, oops, meant to go forward once. I'll just show you really quickly our stack when we're looking at how the Security Operations Center is structured within Palo Alto Networks. This is the entire stack. If you're interested in understanding this in a lot more detail, do visit the SOC tour that I linked before. Devin Johnson will take you through everything. And this has evolved over the years, but you'll see everything that we use today. So for the cloud, we use our SaaS security APIs, Prisma Cloud, and we use Enterprise DLP. For endpoint security, whether that's traditional endpoints like laptops, servers, whatnot, or cloud containers and whatnot, we're using Cortex XDR for anti-malware, exploit protection, behavioral threat protection, you name it, ransomware prevention, EDR collection, post isolation. And then on the network, we use our firewall, of course, Prisma Access, and then a handful of other solutions as well. You'll notice no SIM. We used to use a SIM in the form of Splunk, and then we moved to a cloud-based SIM. We now use Cortex XIM, which we're going to talk on. And really what the core of our response has been over the years, and it's transitioning a bit now. We'll talk about the transition from SOAR to XIM for us, is Cortex XSOAR. And that's where a lot of, it's essentially been the home for the SOC prior to XIM, where we moved XSOAR into XIM. But regardless of whether we're using Cortex XDR or other solutions to protect and respond, the action point, the place where the team has lived, is within the incident war rooms that are created within Cortex XSOAR. And we'll take a look at those in a few minutes. But anything that you can do to respond or to take action within the SOC, we've done through XSOAR for years. And that could be done regardless of whether you're using Cortex XDR for your threat detection and response, or somebody else, whether it's Microsoft or CrowdStrike or some other solution that you're using for that. You can still orchestrate response and have a individual war room created per incident where your security analysts can collaborate, where they can enrich the incident with threat intelligence and take action with any tool that you've integrated in it. And we'll talk more about XSOAR in the future when we get into the details here. But what that looks like for us, and I do see questions that make sense when we move to Office 365. It looks like this is back to the firewall. So we'll let somebody else handle that for now. So I'll just talk briefly about what this looks like in terms of what our SOC sees. And today, actually, I think this is a little out of date. We see about 36 billion events that flow into the Cortex data lake. This is not for our customers. This is for our SOC as a business, so us securing our SOC. That's 36 billion logs that happen from the 13,000 endpoint users that are actively working in our company, and the corresponding endpoints, and the nearly, I think we've got like 400K VMs and servers and endpoints that run our business, not to mention the millions of ephemeral assets that run our SaaS software. All of that infrastructure and servers is feeding into the Cortex data lake on the order of about 36 billion events per day, which is a lot. It's over, I think it's over a terabyte of data. And in terms of raw alerts, we're seeing about 11 million raw alerts on a given day, which is just tremendous, right? Those alerts are automatically, so talking about automation, grouped by Cortex XDR into about 133 incidents. So this is, we call them incidents here, it says alerts, but this is automation at the starting point for Palo Alto on the SOC. So fundamentally what Cortex XDR is looking at that data as it's flowing in and leveraging ML heavily to understand how that data is correlated and automatically group it into incidents. So taking that first step that a security analyst would traditionally do in collating alerts from different sources and building it into a case, essentially. And those 133 alerts may sound like a lot, or incidents sound like a lot for our 10 to 12 analysts that are looking at this, but that's where automation comes into play. The majority of those are automated in terms of how we respond, either partially automated or fully automated. And a lot of the partial automation is down to that final decision, like how do you want to respond to this, where it's orchestrated by Cortex XSOAR. And that leaves about 7 or 8, I think 8 is what I've seen most recently, incidents per day that our team needs to actually manually go in and investigate, which is manageable. The majority of what we see is stuff we've seen before. It's stuff that you've seen before. It's stuff that we should know how best to respond to, what immediate actions we can take, how to enrich that incident with the intelligence that's going to be needed for somebody to push the button and say, this is how we want to respond, to orchestrate that response. And so this is our SOC. And what it comes down to in terms of efficacy is we've driven down the time to detect down to 10 seconds and the time to respond to high priority incidents to about a minute, which is fantastic. And we've had 0 major incidents in Palo Alto Networks. And the savings that we've seen with this stack are really astounding. We've done some math. Our team, I'll take you through some of that in just a minute. And Devin will go into more detail on the SOC tour if you're interested. But the savings that the automation piece, the XOR playbooks provide for us, we've calculated, or the SOC team has calculated, down to about 15 or 16 full-time engineers in terms of operational efficiency. What does that look like for us? We've deployed quite a number of playbooks. And then what you'll see here is just we kind of categorize those. On the left, the first column, we have top level playbooks that we have for each technology or request source. So these are essentially the categories of automation playbooks that we've got. And then the majority of the analysis happens in that second column, where we want to calculate, the severity of the ticket based on information like who the user is or what host it's happening on. We pull host details from various sources, including Cortex and ServiceNow, where our IT teams maintain our asset database in ServiceNow for CMDB today. And we want to know if this user or endpoint is critical, or if the application is critical, the service critical, and who is the contact for it. So all that information is pulled in automatically. We want to know if the account engaged in something is a privileged account, or whether the user is a C-suite executive, and all of the indicators are run through our threat intel sources that we mentioned in the previous slide, and the result is added to the ticket automatically. So this is really kind of a high-level summary of all of the playbooks that we use internally that drive that fully automated or partially automated response that we have within Cortex. And this is kind of the math that I mentioned that the team has done, and Devin goes into this in a lot more detail. But if you just look at, if we talk about enrichment and the hours saved there, just doing the enrichment of incidents and alerts that are coming in, deduping and emailing users, re-imaging machines, resetting passwords, it's a tremendous amount of efficiency that we gain by leveraging playbooks to do this. So that all sounds great. What I would say is that, look, our SOC is definitely the shining example of automation. This is not necessarily resonating with a lot of our customers who aren't as, how shall I say, well-staffed, maybe set up to leverage Cortex as efficiently as we do. And so that's what I want to kind of address next is, how is the industry doing with automation, and what can we do to help them with it? So when we look at what's actually happening, regardless of whether they're using Cortex and they have XOR, we have a lot of customers that have great maturity that rivals and equals what our SOC is doing with XOR. But oftentimes automation is kind of an afterthought. And what's actually happening is in the SOC is, as all these just human readable alerts are coming in that just kind of contain a synopsis or a snippet that helps the analyst understand what might be happening. All of that information is flowing in from these different tools to an analyst who is doing the detection, investigation, and response. And this notion of automation really has been a shining example of how we can improve in terms of SOC efficiency. And everybody's got it as a checklist item they want to do. But what's happening is the SOC is overrun with alerts. They're overrun with incidents. And so automation is often an afterthought as we're doing the detection, investigation, and response. We try to audit what we've done. I think XOR does a great job if you're using the war room in terms of how you're doing response, of auditing that and using that as a foundation for automation. But because of the nature of the business and the nature of the skill gap and resource gap there is in the security industry, we often don't have time to build the playbooks and to leverage automation. And so when we look forward to Cortex, we're going to talk about XIM and how it's designed around the principle to help out with this. So this notion of creating playbooks after an investigation and allowing you to then optimize response for that in the future is the industry goal. But when we look at most businesses, they're struggling with that. They're struggling with the number of playbooks they've been able to put in place. And so I think there's a lot we can gain by sharing that information with each other through the Slack groups that we've got on Slack to help kind of share what are the best practices and playbooks in place. But we also think that there's work that we can do on the product side to help with this. And we've been spending a lot of time on that. So we're going to talk about that. So how do we move to a place where we're leveraging automation up front? How do we leverage AI and ML to really help with the process of automation? That is one of the core goals that we've built into or designed around when we've talked about and developed XIM. So we're going to talk about that. How do we leverage automation? How do we leverage AI to really build a case and do the detection, investigation, and sometimes response, depending on how much the SOC will allow us to, and hand off something to the SOC analyst that is already automated for the large part. So that's what we want to talk about today. So for the past couple of years, we've been designing a new solution around this principle of how do we have machines and AI really facilitate and empower humans, driven around kind of three core principles. One, analytics. And we believe fundamentally that analytics is effective because of the data. It's great data that drives great analytics. And I think Palo's in a great place, given that we have excellent sensors, obviously on the firewall and on the endpoint side to collect that great data. We also think that there's fantastic and valuable data in third-party data as well. So we'll talk about data ingest and the importance of that on the XIM platform. So first and foremost, being able to control the data, because really, this isn't about how much data, although a volume of data can be used for machine learning and training, which is great, but it's also about the quality of that data. So when we look at and understand, as Unit 42 and our threat researchers are understanding how new techniques are being used, how do we go and collect additional context and telemetry from endpoint, from network, from cloud, from identity providers to make sure that we are able to collect the context that's going to allow an ML system to decide between a false positive and a true positive. So it's really important to have access to that data. And then how do we focus on this principle of letting machines do the work, leveraging automation wherever possible? The last principle that we designed XIM around was more around proactive security. So we've got great solutions in place in the industry around reactive, prevention first, focus on Cortex side, and then detect and respond quickly. But still, regardless of what tool set you're using, there's still initial execution and access that is occurring in the industry. How do we get more proactive in our approach to security and look at where a business is likely to get attacked? So we've designed or kind of built three pillars of product security around those principles, which, you may know about. I'll go back one. Cortex XDR, first and foremost, is all about visibility. It's about that great data and collecting that data. And it's also the platform that is doing the analysis of that data. And it's the foundation for where endpoint detection and response is kind of the foundation of Cortex extended detection and response. XDR is also the foundation for what we'll talk about next, which is XIM. But this is all about data collection, and not just the collection of data. We store all of the data as raw logs, as you would expect in any solution, but more about how, when that data is coming in, how do we automate the process of investigation? How do we stitch, as we talk about this data together? And what does that actually mean? As I said, we're storing the data as individual logs, but at the time of ingestion, we are also looking at, and we've applied dozens, if not hundreds of ML models to analyze that data to understand how it might be related, right? So if we're looking at something that isn't clearly malicious because it's not malware, but we're looking at legitimate usage of PowerShell or tools for doing normal activity, whether it's SSH or PSExec or RPC calls within applications, those are not malicious activities, but they certainly are often used maliciously. So how do we look at that activity and understand whether it truly is or is not malicious? Well, it's by looking at the context that comes along with it, looking at the additional information in terms of user activity, identity related triggers or threats that might be a concern, failed logins, unusual authentication times or locations, unusual application behavior. How do we look at this in the lens of network activities? Is this unusual connection to a domain for this user that's associated with this PowerShell activity or whatnot? And leverage all of that which is very valuable. When we stitch all that into a single story, when you end up looking at maybe a PowerShell activity within Cortex, you'll find the correlated activity in the data management layer stored as a story, which is great for threat hunters, but it's really important for ML, for AI. It needs that context, that enrichment to understand whether or not something is malicious or not. So that's XDR. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but Cortex XSOAR is, regardless of whether you're collecting that data and doing incident detection and response or threat detection and response through Cortex or some other tool, it's all about how do we improve speed and efficiency by automating response. So this is all about playbooks and workflow, and how do we kick off workflow and response quickly. And so we'll take a look at that. And last but not least, both Cortex XDR and XSOAR are reactive security. They're waiting for something to happen to the business. Cortex Xpanse is all about how do we move to a proactive approach to security and look where the business is most likely to be attacked. So I'll talk about these things in a little more detail briefly in case you're not familiar with them. If you are, don't worry, it'll be brief, and then we'll get into XIM. First, Cortex XDR is really the heart and soul of our visibility from an endpoint detection and response perspective and beyond, right? Collecting data from not just the endpoint, but from network, from cloud, from identity sources, and providing a single agent solution for endpoint security that is probably arguably the best kept secret in the industry. Hopefully some of you are using it and finding that it is very effectively providing prevention, detection, and response for your endpoint security. But that single agent provides everything from prevention, detection to EPP capabilities, like you would expect from vulnerability assessment, host insights, device control, disk encryption, and a host firewall, a number of other features around endpoint protection. And then it's all about understanding the behavior of users, entities like endpoints, servers, VMs, and applications, and how those behaviors are changing, profiling the user and entity behavior to understand what type of user is this, what type of endpoint is this, and then monitoring for changes in behavior and understanding how that may represent potential concern. And then that single agent is also in place for you to do automated root cause analysis to swiftly investigate and to respond. The agent contains a full response toolkit from integrated live terminal, search and destroy, all the way down to a DFIR toolkit, which is included. A lot of folks maintain their own DFIR toolkit, but that is part of the solution. So outstanding solution, and continues every year to perform extremely well in public evaluations in terms of efficacy, in the MITRE evaluations and AV comparatives EPR testing. So this is the foundation of the great data that we use for analytics, and also the analytics that we use for understanding how behaviors represent potential risk in the environment. So automation isn't just in the form of playbooks. It's really about how we ingest data and how we leverage ML at the time of ingestion to understand where there might be risk. We'll talk about the workhorse that is our solution, our platform for automation. This is XSOAR. If you're using XSOAR, you probably know and are using it. When we talk to customers that are using it, it never surprises us the amazing stories we hear about what they're using automation for. This solution is plugged into over 800 different integrations with IT and security solutions, most used industry IT and security solutions in the market, which gives you great flexibility to automate your response and orchestrate it through the API level integration with other tools. And again, this doesn't matter if you're using Cortex or Palo as your endpoint detection and response or your extended detection and response source. It can bring in incidents and alerts from any solution and give you a war room. We'll take a look at that war room for how you actually coordinate your response and optimize and improve efficiency around response. So this is all about workflow and improving speed. So as an incident or alert is coming in, how do we collect additional information about the entities, the IOCs that are associated with that environment to give you the full foundation you need for making decisions on how to respond. We call it extended security orchestration and automation response because we love green X's in front of everything. No, it's really because the platform provides so much more than a traditional SOAR. It provides a full and complete threat intel management platform. So it is a TIP as well as a SOAR. And a lot of our customers are actually leveraging the case management, the full featured case management as a security focused case management solution for for their SOC. Maybe because they don't want to put sensitive security information in their traditional or their corporate case management solution, whether that be ServiceNow or something else. But for security focused ticketing, a lot of folks are using the extended capabilities here as well. So there is no limit to what you can do and automate with XSOAR, it seems. And I think a lot of that has to do with the community engagement in the XSOAR marketplace and the massive amount of integrations that we have within Cortex XSOAR. So both our Cortex XDR and XSOAR tools are all about how we prevent and respond rapidly. Let's talk just briefly about ASM before we get into XIM and talk more about automation and AI as we move forward. Xpanse is really born out of a necessity from our SOC, regardless of the automation and great prevention and detection response we had put in place. Our business continued to see initial attempts to penetrate our defenses by adversaries. And so really, we started using before it was Cortex or Palo Alto, we started using Xpanse to understand how the adversary was making those inroads into attempting to breach Palo Alto Networks. And this is really about looking at the business holistically from the outside in. How would an adversary prioritize an attack on Palo Alto Networks, which happens every day? And so it's about looking at the business from the outside in. We've deployed great technology and sensors to collect telemetry and automate the correlation of that telemetry with an XDR. But how does an adversary look at our business? They don't look at it from the deployment inside, unless they're a malicious insider. They're looking at the business from the outside. What attack surfaces might be exposed that we may not be monitoring because we've got some shadow IT, because we've got a lot of developers that are constantly standing up new environments and may not be securing them in the way we desire, or we're working with partners that potentially expose us, as we've seen in supply chain attacks and whatnot, that may provide additional risk vectors. Maybe there's M&A activity that is underway, which Palo has engaged in, obviously, that might put us at risk, or something that we're considering. So at the heart of what Xpanse is, it's a massively scaled SaaS application that is scanning the internet multiple times per day to understand any and all assets, any and all ports, any and all servers that are exposed externally that an adversary might take advantage of, and cataloging that and creating a massive database of intelligence about all assets that exist. And then as we're engaging with ourselves or a customer, we feed information about the business that we're concerned about. If it's Palo or if it's Acme Corporation, we feed the domains, the subdomains, the certificate authorities, the IPs, the ranges, certificates, all that information to the Cortex Xpanse attribution engine. And it spits out or maintains continuously an understanding of that business's attack surface, as it may be represented because of the IoT devices they have, the externally facing on-prem assets, the sanctioned and unsanctioned cloud assets, the supply chain partners they may have, and beyond. If you're interested in understanding how working with a new supply chain partner or bringing on a new business through an acquisition or merger might impact your security, that's what Cortex Xpanse is all about. How do we actively understand what the attack surface for the business is, and not just what that surface is, but in a prioritized manner? So we're constantly interacting, sending sample payloads to these services to understand information and profile what type of or what version of a server or service that may be, so that we can understand the corresponding CVEs that might be associated with it. And we compile all that information, wrap it up into a report that's continuously updated for the business, that based on what we know about those services and the risk they represent, gives you a prioritized understanding of what you need to remediate. That's ASM. I would actually argue that the industry, although there's a lot of acquisitions of small technology players in this space, is getting very hot in this space, but I would say that that's really not ASM. It's more visibility and discovery. So management, I think, is overly used in the industry. And so I would say we tacked on active ASM because what Xpanse is actually doing is taking you beyond just understanding your attack surface, but how do we leverage the DNA of Cortex to really improve response and mitigate or actively manage that attack surface. So when something is identified within Xpanse, you're going to get a new alert that's created within Xpanse or Xpander, and we're going to leverage the expertise we have in the SOAR side to walk you through the remediation of that. So once that alert is created, we kick off a playbook that will help you remediate that by identifying who the owner of that asset in question is, reaching out to that owner to try to facilitate the closure of that port or service, updating tickets corresponding tickets to that, and then if needed, escalating to the assets to actually do the remediation and then closing that. So it's not just giving you a report of what your scorecard is, how you compare to your peers, where the risk is, but actively giving you a tool for managing and mitigating that. And we've seen tremendous improvement in terms of the time it takes to improve our attack surface to address the concerns that come out, where we're no longer spending days or weeks in improving the attack surface, but we're able to do so in hours instead of minutes or hours in terms of our response time. So that's excellent. So all of these tools are the core, the portfolio that our SOC uses, but they're now using them within a new SOC platform that we introduced late last year, which we call XIM. And if you have trouble remembering it, you can see Nikesh likes to use the will.i.am analogy if you forget how to say it. I like to use more the green eggs and ham, and I think it goes with the Cortex green. So XIM, think green eggs and ham. This is the autonomous SOC platform that we have been building. Let's talk about autonomy and autonomous. This is a notion that is being used a lot in the industry and in self-driving cars. We hear Elon talking about and selling full self-driving automation. Nir Zook often talks about an automated or autonomous SOC. And I think those are great North Stars, but as Jeremy pointed out, I don't think we will have a SOC that is, or I think it was actually Devin Johnstone points out in our SOC tour. I don't think we'll have a fully autonomous SOC, but I think that's a great North Star to shoot for. And so really that's the design or goal that we're shooting for when we talk about Cortex XIM. We've been working with for over a year before launch some of our biggest Cortex XDR customers to address a new platform that really changes the way the SOC is designed, what the SOC is designed around, and built a home for the SOC. And if we think about where Cortex is coming from, right, the endpoint security market, I would say, has gone through transformation after transformation in recent years and decades, and most have moved from traditional endpoint security in the form of Symantec or McAfee to something more modern in the form of EDR. But if we look at the rest of the landscape, we've also seen tremendous improvement around network security, from perimeter-based security to zero trust and SASE, infrastructure security and moving our workloads to the cloud from the data center. And as I mentioned, generational changes in endpoint security. But most businesses are still centering their security, their SOC around a SIEM solution, which was architected decades ago. And so really that's where we saw the opportunity. As we launched XDR 4.5 to 5 years ago, one of the most common questions we've got is, if we're feeding all that information into XDR, an extended detection and response platform, can we also address SIEM use cases with that XDR solution? And that hasn't been our design objective for XDR. The XDR solution has been built primarily around prevention, detection, and response. But from a cost perspective and looking at the opportunity in the industry, our customers are telling us they want to do more with less. And so that's a design objective that we put into XIM, is to really address that with a focus on how do we really reduce the burden on the analysts by focusing on automation and analytics wherever possible. And so that's really been the objective, is how do we look at, as this data is being ingested, increasing and improving the usage of automation and AI to basically act as a platform for the analysts to stand on top of, so that they're not inundated with so much volume and heavy telemetry, and have the AI look at that. And really, when we think about what an analyst is looking at today, again, they're looking at those high level human readable alerts. And even that is arduous given the volume they're looking at. Whereas a machine can actually get deeper and look at the underlying telemetry beyond those human readable alerts. It can dive in and look at the telemetry and understand the nuances of that data, to understand how a change in behavior might be occurring, and use that as the foundation for detection and response. So what this is, Cortex XIM is a really kind of a transformation in the way the SOC works, bringing you a platform which is focused on threat detection and response at the center, and providing all the core components you need to run the SOC around that, from orchestration automation to endpoint security, extended detection and response, user and behavioral analytics, whether it be on network, endpoint, or cloud, reporting and compliance. So this is a core component that the SIEM has really stuck around for. Most people have not been able to get prevention and detection and threat detection and response from their SIEM, but it is serving as a great solution for reporting and for industry vertical compliance reports and whatnot. And so really now XIM can address that within a platform that's really centered around threat detection and response. All of this founded on a data foundation and detection analytics platform, and then adding threat intel management and attack surface management and orchestration and automation to fill out the complete scenario. So when we're talking about XIM, we're talking about a single application. I'm going to show you that application here in just a minute. This is not a bunch of applications that are glued together. If you're an XDR user or a SOAR, XOR user, when you see XOR or XDR or Xpanse roll to a new version in the future, you'll see all the other applications roll as well, because this truly is one application platform now within the solution. So let me jump out here. I'll get us into the product. So what you're looking at now, if you're an XDR user, it might look familiar. It looks a lot like XDR. We've got a dashboard up here where we're looking at risk management, not a particularly interesting environment where we've got some pseudo users that we're looking at here, and we can understand where the risk associated with those users exists. But let me dive in and show you, I want you to understand that what we're looking at here is more than what you're traditionally used to. I'll jump into a look at incidents. So we talked about incidents before and the work that XDR is doing to automate investigations. So this is an incident that is interesting. We've turned off prevention. So it's a doozy, right? And you're not, hopefully, those of you who are out there using XDR don't see incidents like this very often, unless maybe you're turning off prevention and you're trying to let an adversary move through. But you'll see in this case, these are the MITRE tactics and techniques that were used in this particular incident, where we've got an adversary that's landed, done initial execution, established persistence, evaded defenses theoretically, and gathered credentials and moved throughout and exfiltrated data. This is because we've allowed them to do so. And then we're pulling in telemetry from quite a number of sources. In this case, there are a couple of different assets involved. But when we talk about extended detection and response, what we're looking at here, so this is one of the executions on one of the laptops involved, and I'll just expand this. And if you're using an EDR tool today, this flow will whether you're using Cortex or something else, will look somewhat familiar. You'll see all of the details of execution that you would expect in an EDR tool. In this case, we've got somebody that's leveraging Chrome, and it looks like they've pulled down a zip file. We've got an alert that's fired associated with that binary file being created to disk with double extension. So that should have been enough to realize something was going on. But this user didn't notice this, but this zip file actually, in this case, executed what looks like, or the user executed an MP4 that resulted from this zip file, but it wasn't. It was actually an executable masquerading as an MP4. I know that might be hard to see. I'll try to zoom in there for you so you can see. So this was 36 chambers, which I think is a Wu-Tang video or some sort that's associated with this, but it was actually an executable. What's unique here, though, is beyond just seeing all of the activity that happened from that malware, like the network connections that were made, the file connections or reads and writes that were made, the registry connections that were made, is we're also seeing stitched in, Cortex has identified that there is some firewall activity associated with this, where some this PID, this actual execution of this process, is responsible for maybe a C2 connection. So you're seeing that actually stitched in here, which is unique. And that's really the difference between EDR and XDR, is the stitching of that data in, which may show up in an incident like that, or may show up in a search in the data management layer. Doing more with less, is there a plan to assess? I'm just looking at one of the questions here. Is there a plan to assess Windows application vulnerabilities in Cortex XDR like it currently does for Linux applications? So good question. That is, I believe, on the roadmap. I think we've got to get, Tom, that question into the PM team to understand exactly when that is coming, but I do know that has been on the roadmap for a bit, and I don't know the exact time frame for that. But if you'd like to follow up with maybe your SE or rep, I'd love to have a conversation about that in more detail and bring our PM team into that discussion. So let me just show you. So this, for the most part, what we've been looking at here looks like EDR. It looks like Cortex XDR/EDR, and we've seen kind of the integration of additional data. But let me show you a little bit more. So in those of you who are XSOAR users, you'll notice for this incident, you've got an integrated war room. So XSOAR has been essentially lifted and built around the Cortex XIM platform now. So you'll see everything you've come to expect, or almost everything. We're in the process of filling out that, that capability matrix for traditional hosted or on-prem XSOAR around the XIM platform. But you've got the war room here. So anything you want to do to respond to this incident, whether that be responding via taking actions in Active Directory, or your identity and access management solution can be initiated right from within the war room that is created for this incident. And that means you've got to have the centralized place where you can take action, not just against Cortex XDR or other solutions, but you name it, you can do your integration here, and that will be audited, and you can use that as the foundation for playbooks moving forward. Speaking of which, we can see the playbooks here. So those of you who are familiar with XSOAR will recognize, I'm just going to pick on some of these. Again, this incident ran from start to finish, was not prevented. And so we've got a lot of different incidents that kicked off at different times of different playbooks that have run at different times of this execution. I'll just pick on one so you can see. And if you're familiar, you'll see that the traditional interface for playbook creation within Cortex XIM now. So here you've got a fully fledged playbook. This one is specifically related to third-party data that's flowing in. And you could see the flow that was taken here in response to this. And it looks like I'm still zoomed in, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. But you can see that we're asking questions of the information in this playbook to understand exactly what happened. We've got some interaction with the user, asked the user if they were involved or did this. And so you've got this playbook that essentially has run to fruition and has been closed by the solution. So these are the examples of the playbooks that you've run in your environment that have run to closure. And there's some that are maybe waiting for an analyst to make a decision. So here's one that's partially run, it looks like, and I haven't seen this one in particular, but is waiting for an analyst to do something. So it's orchestrating response, and that is here as well. We'll see if that renders. Looks like it will. So we're waiting to decide whether or not this machine should stay isolated, and the analyst is going to make that decision because that wasn't something we wanted to be made in an automated fashion. So that's all, expected and normal with a SOAR platform. But what I think is really interesting as we talk about the usage of automation and extending the use of automation here, is looking not just at the playbooks that have run and those that are waiting, but now you've got, and there are a number of them here, again, because this is a solution that, or a path, an adversarial path that went all the way from start to finish, playbooks that the solution, the system, XIM is recommending to you because other customers or our research team have decided that these are playbooks that you should consider running. And maybe there was some credential gathering that was done in this incident. The solution is now saying, we think you should consider this playbook because of the alerts or insights that are coming in. You can preview that playbook, see what it does, and choose right then and there to run that playbook in your environment in response to this incident if you see fit, or you could analyze that playbook externally, modify it as you see fit, and then adopt it. But you've got the opportunity to preview a playbook that the solution is saying, we think you would benefit from. We think you should automate response to this in this way because it's really important to address response to credential gathering very, very quickly. So this is where we're talking about, when we talked about automation, you've got organizations that are very mature in terms of their implementation of automation, like Palo Alto Networks and some of our customers. But as I mentioned, for the majority of businesses, they aren't as mature. They haven't had the focus on automation or the automation gurus to actually construct those playbooks or harvest those from the community and bring those in. So it's very valuable for the solution to be saying, all right, here's some playbooks we think you could leverage in response to this that you would benefit from. So again, how does the solution help improve your maturity? By recommending where you can start with automation. And that's a core competency and component of what Cortex XIM is bringing to the table that you wouldn't see in a traditional SOAR solution. So all of that is built in. So again, the single platform for doing your endpoint detection response, extended detection and response, for going out and then looking at your external attack surface as well, not just SOAR, but looking at all of the assets within your environment and actually giving you a path to actually remediate those. So we've got our external assets here. Maybe these are RDP servers that have been identified in the environment, and giving you the attack surface management capabilities to look at those incidents and actually remediate those. And I picked one here. I have no idea which one I clicked on, but to get the detail that is associated with that and to give you a path forward to closing that all within one platform. So I wanted to give you just a quick snippet or look at the Cortex XIM platform and everything that it brings to the table. This is really designed around how do we help our customers mature in terms of how they're leveraging automation and AI by giving you a platform that brings it all together, that addresses all the concerns across the board. And really, if regardless of whether you're using that platform, so you can still continue to use the Cortex products individually. We still will continue to provide Cortex XDR, XSOAR, and Xpanse as best of breed products for threat detection and response, automation, and attack surface management. But if you're looking for something that brings that all together and addresses doing more with less, and you're looking at consolidating on your SIM stack as well, XIM is there for you. One place that I would say that we're focused on really addressing a need for SIM replacement is compliance. So if you're using XIM today, there is no industry compliance reporting today, but that is a feature that is #1 on the backlog and coming, I believe, in the next release is industry compliance reporting. So if you're using your SIM for compliance reporting, whether that be PCI or HIPAA or you name it, that's what we find a lot of customers are keeping their SIMs around for. They may be using the EDR or XDR platform of their choice as their primary go-to for prevention, for threat detection and response, but still holding on to their SIM, their legacy SIM, for auditing, for compliance reporting. And really, we don't think it's long before that should be part of a single solution, a single platform that does all of that for you. And that is almost a reality across the board for SIM scenarios for us. We use, back to doing more with less, if you're looking for experts in leveraging these tools, our Unit 42 expert security services teams leverage Cortex as their platform of choice. They'll use whatever they can within an environment where they're engaging in an incident response investigation, a breach investigation, whatever you've got in place. But oftentimes, as a part of that engagement, if they need additional information, if they need a defer response toolkit, they will ask if they can deploy Cortex in that environment. And oftentimes that is done free of cost as part of the incident response engagement. And the end result of that is oftentimes the customer will ask if they can continue to keep that solution set in place in their environment. So if we just look at, kind of the savings that our SOC has gotten, and I think Devin goes into this in the SOC tour, we look at the benefits that we've seen, and we're just running out of time. I want to leave time for questions here. Tremendous efficiency improvements around a number of areas, whether that be threat detection development. So I look at this as detection engineering as a service that comes out of the box with XIM. We used to spend nearly 120 hours a week as a part of our SOC to do that work specifically around the SIM. And we've been able to greatly reduce that and just focus on how do we do that for the things that are unique to our environment versus those that are largely done by XIM. And the story goes on and on around alert tuning, system maintenance, and data correlation. You can look at this or get into the SOC tour to get more detail. But yeah, so I just wanted to present that to you. This is what our SOC is now using. This is how we keep Palo Alto Networks secure, is on the XIM stack. And the usage of the underlying tools, XDR, XSOAR, and Xpanse, all integrated into that single platform now. And that is how we've been able to really optimize our SOC and leverage our people and focus their attention by improving automation use. Now, that's something specifically I think that our team has been doing for a while, even before XIM existed. The purpose of XIM is really to bring that automation improvement to the masses, to give them a tool that will help them, that will leverage AI and machine learning to optimize or improve your security posture moving forward, to help you in your journey in improving security posture. So that's what I wanted to share with you all. Hopefully you benefited from that. I'll look and see if there are additional questions that we've got to address here. I see, Jayant, this has a centralized management, or these different modules. Hopefully I've addressed that, Jayant. There are separate modules if you're interested in purchasing them separately, or you can go the XIM route and get all of the modules in one application. So that should be addressed within the platform. Tom, in the interest of doing more with less, is there a plan to assess? Oh, we talked about that one. I apologize, Tom. That was one that was already answered. If there are additional questions, please feel free to send them my way. And I think that is pretty much it. And I will hand it back to Katie.